Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Eric Blinderman, Senior Director of Communications at the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. The Eliminate Aviation Gasoline-Led Emissions Initiative, better known as EAGLE, is hosting this stakeholder briefing today so that we can provide updates on the status and latest developments in the initiative to support a safe and seamless transition to an unleaded future state. This is another update in our pledge of transparency as we move forward in this safe and smart transition. You can see by the agenda that we have a full afternoon for you. Joining me today to review our status are the EAGLE co-chairs, Kirk Castagna, President and CEO of the National Air Transportation Association, and Lirio Liu, Executive Director of Aircraft Certification Service at the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA. We also have our pillar leads and subject matter experts on the call today. They include Ryan Manner with EAGLE, who leads our supply chain infrastructure and development pillar. Jennifer Miller with Lycoming, leading the research, development, and innovation pillar. Tim Owen of the FAA, who leads the unleaded fuel evaluation and authorization pillar. And Ralph Ivanelli of the FAA, who leads regulation, policy, and programmatic activity pillars. Also joining us today on the call are members of the EAGLE Executive Committee. Now, for today's update, we will start with opening remarks from our co-chairs, then move into updates on the status of unleaded fuels, and we'll see the work being done in each of our 4 working pillars. We have saved some time at the end for questions, your questions. Please feel free to enter them into the chat at any time, and then we will forward those questions to the appropriate speaker. At this time, I'd like to hand it to our EAGLE co-chairs for some opening remarks. Lirio?
Finding the unmute button, thank you. First off, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the EAGLE Stakeholders meeting. Let me first take the moment to express my personal and mine from the whole gratitude to Mark Baker, who was the CEO and president of AOPA, who was the CEO, for his tenure as the first EAGLE co-chair, first off. Really appreciated his taking on that as the first co-chair and getting this kicked off to where we are today. So thank you, Mark, for your leadership as we work to make the safe and smart transition of unleaded gasoline. I'd also like to welcome and introduce Kirk Castagna, who from NATA is the president and CEO of the Aviation Business Advocate, and he's also the EAGLE's new industry co-chair. So welcome, Kirk. So anyway, we are speaking with you today to provide a general update about where we are in the industry in terms of the development and the distribution of a viable replacement for the unleaded aviation gasoline. As most of you know, the EAGLE initiative is a comprehensive industry government partnership consisting of aviation and petroleum industry and U.S. government stakeholders, all working together for the transition of lead-free aviation fuels for piston engines aircraft with a target date of 2030 or sooner, without compromising safety, of course, or economic health of the general aviation industry. So I'm going to pass it on to Kirk for this moment.
Thank you so much, Lirio. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone. I'd too like to thank Mark Baker, not only for his leadership here with EAGLE, but also to the industry and his mentorship to many of us. I'm honored to serve in the role of co-chair of EAGLE and the EAGLE initiative, and to work alongside you, Lirio, with our shared goal of an unleaded future for general aviation. EAGLE continues to prioritize a safe and efficient transition as we progress towards the eventual distribution of new fuels to airports and FBOs. During this time, we encourage the early adoption of current unleaded fuels to act as a bridge until a commercially viable replacement for 100 low lead is available. Ensuring a safe transition is highly complex, but NATA and our industry partners are demonstrating leadership by providing education for the complete process, from science to the wing of the airplane. And to that end, NATA is pleased to offer several free resources, from guidance on introducing a second aviation gasoline, to misfueling prevention training, to our recent white paper on the factors affecting commercial sale of emerging unleaded fuels. This timely resource will help aviation and community stakeholders understand the dynamics of commercial availability, including considerations on the status of unleaded fuels, the paths to authorization, and safety concerns such as materials compatibility and misfueling. Because of the different regions across the country have unique operational environments, we must engage with aviation stakeholders in areas with significant dependence on general aviation, such as Alaska and Hawaii. Eagle's partnerships with the Alaska Air Carriers Association and the Alaska Airmen's Association will help keep Alaskans informed about the timelines for a coordinated transition without adversely affecting the state's general aviation operations nor its fuel supply. All of this emphasis is a critical point. We must ensure the continued availability of 100 low lead nationwide throughout our transition to an unleaded replacement. Thank you again, Lario, and I'll pass it back to Eric.
Thank you, Lario and Kurt. Before we dive deeper into the progress of the work being done within our pillars, we thought it would be helpful for everyone to present an illustration, a graphic that helps bring alive the picture of the processes of Eagle's work on the transition to an unleaded future state. Now, Rob Hackman, could you please take us through this chart at this point?
Sure will, Eric. This is Rob Hackman with EAA. And this chart is intended to be a visual representation of how the Eagle pillars are structured and are working together to help facilitate the transition and the removal of lead emissions by the 2030 or sooner timeline that was articulated just a bit ago. So this slide is something to keep in mind as we go through the presentation and you hear from each of the pillars and their updates. So we'll quick do a walkthrough of this. Next slide, please. So initially, the fuel applicants will enter into the program pursuing an authorization through one of two different methods. The top portion, or the highlighted section of the chart, articulates the FAA fleet authorization process, which utilizes the PAFI testing program, the Piston Aviation Fuels Initiative. You're going to hear about an update about the Lyondell and VP Racing Fuels that is currently going through this particular process. Next slide, please. The second manner for receiving an authorization or approval is through a change to the type certificate or the supplemental type certificate process. This particular side has both GAMI and SWIFT working through the STC process. It utilizes either a company specification to control the fuel or an ASTM specification to approve the fuel, but ultimately results in an approval as well. The fleet authorization, the top portion, utilizes and results in both an authorization and an ASTM specification. Next slide, please. Both pathways lead to effectively an authorization for the fuel to be used in the aircraft. The next pillar, the research and development pillar, is in place, and you'll hear an update on this, to utilize any particular technologies or other systems in place to help aircraft make the transition that may need additional resources in order to transition. May need something other than the actual fuel itself to make the transition. So that research pillar is in place to support those, and you'll hear an update on that. Next slide. So the distribution pillar, supply and distribution pillar, looks at the production, distribution onto the airport, into the wing, and beyond installation of the actual approvals, and is working to provide information to folks that are in the program today with respect to current supply and distribution of our existing fuel, so that can be considered as we look at the future of new fuels. That's not to say that new fuels will follow the exact same supply and distribution. They may find others, but understanding the nature of our fuels today is important for understanding how these fuels come into place. It's through a major portion of this activity supports what Kurt was referring to, which is the commercial decisions of the fuel being implemented out into the field. This is where many of the businesses will need to make their decisions with regards to aircraft manufacturers, FBOs, fixed-base operators, flight schools, and the like. So this supports more than just the technical and regulatory portion, but the commercial and business discussions that need to take place. This is also important for ensuring that our fuel gets to the wing of the aircraft safe, dry, and on specification. Next slide, please. Each of these pillars is actually working to inform and support our remaining pillar, which is our regulatory policy pillar. This is the rulemaking for both the EPA and the FAA. And this entire process is working to not only provide information out into the industry, but also to provide and inform the rulemaking process as it works toward the ultimate removal of the leaded fuel by the 20 or 30 sooner timeline that we've laid out. So this visual representation, we can click to our last slide, this visual representation gives you an idea of how these pillars are actually structured, how they're working together, and how they're an effort to support the process and support the key goal of removing lead emissions by 2030 or sooner. And with that, I'll turn it back to Eric.
Thank you, Rob, for that update. Very helpful in setting the stage for our pillar discussions today. Since our last stakeholder briefing, there has been progress made on the fuel development side. Larry, I'd like for you to address where we are on a fuel status update.
Certainly, thank you. Happy to share what we know and where we are with the candidate fuels. As I've mentioned before, there are two pathways, and just as Rob indicated through that very helpful graphic, I hope that that depiction helps to lay the pathway for where we're going. But there are the two pathways to get the FAA safety approval. As we said, you can do the fleet authorization through the PAPI program, or a traditional certification, which is the STC process. The fleet authorization process was established by Congress, building on a collaborative industry and government testing program, which we call the Piston Aviation Fuels Initiative. You've heard that many times now, it's PAFI. The STC is a traditional FAA aircraft supplemental type certification process. In both cases, the FAA approves the use of the fuel. The fuel itself is self-regulated by industry based on a fuel specification and the related standards, which you can see, as we indicated there, either company spec or an ACM spec. So where we are right now, Lionel, Bessel, and VP Racing. So Lionel, Bessel, VP Racing, the UL 100 E-fuel is currently undergoing the full-scale testing under the PAFI program. The full-scale testing involves engine performance testing on 10 different engine models, flight testing on 8 different aircraft models, and then comprehensive material testing. On April 10th of this year, the UL 100 E-fuel successfully completed the first 350-hour full-scale engine durability test on a TSIO 550K engine. So additionally, 350-hour engine durability tests are planned on 3 different models, which will include the IO360 C1F, the W670-6N, and the O360-A1A. So successful full-scale testing is expected to culminate in a fleet authorization of the fuel within a 12 to 18-month timeframe. Now, the Lionel, Bessel, and VP Racing are also working with ASTM International to obtain an industry consensus standard for their fuel. And you'll hear more about the specific details of the engine and materials testing during the unleaded fuel evaluation discussion that we'll talk about later in the session. The second fuel, Afton Phillips 66, they have decided to pause their testing at this moment. Their latest fuel formulation was undergoing some PAFI testing. And after there were some deposits and signs of pre-ignition during the initial engine endurance test, there was a decision to make the pause. Phillips 66 has stated its commitment to the Eagle vision to eliminate the leaded emissions no later than 2030, and is developing a strategy to support that vision. So appreciate that work that's continuing on the side. GAMI, the GAMI 100 UL fuel program. Right now, GAMI has an approved model list supplemental type certificate approval to use the G100 UL avgas in all certified piston engines and airplanes. They also have obtained an STC for rotorcraft and are working that project with the FAA. So they've applied for that STC right now, so it's ongoing. GAMI has submitted a flight test report for this project based on flight testing that was conducted using the Robinson helicopter. GAMI reported last week that Vitol Aviation has produced an initial production tank of approximately 1.2 million gallons of G100 UL, which is being conformed to the G100 UL avgas specification on April 10th. So GAMI and Vitol announced at Sun and Fun that the G100 UL is now available for sale. And another fuel going through the STC program is Swift Fuel. Swift has submitted all of their approved and conforming test results for an initial STC for the use of their 100R to the FAA. FAA is currently in the process of reviewing that data. Upon approval of the initial STC, Swift Fuel plans to broadly expand the approval through an approved model list later this year. Swift Fuel is also working with the ASTM International to obtain an industry consensus standard for the 100R fuel. So that's the status of the 4 fuels we have right now.
Thank you, Lario. Just as a reminder for everyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to pose them in the chat, and we will get to them at the end of our session. So as you can see, there's a lot of work going on to ensure that we have a safe replacement and transition for unleaded fuel in the near future. Now let's turn to the first pillar update, which will be on fuel evaluation and authorization, and presented by Tim Owen. Tim.
So the basic objectives of the pillar for unleaded fuel and evaluation authorization are presented here, which is complete the testing, identify at least one unleaded fuel acceptable for widespread use, institutionalize the fleet authorization process for unleaded fuels, and again, the education, training, awareness, and outreach. And again, the key considerations are fuel quality, safety, fleet impact, mitigations. Deliverables are the fleet authorization process, which is documented in an FAA policy statement that was published last year. Provide the authorizations for the fuels and the eligible models, the test evaluation process, test plans and test reports, lessons learned, and interface with the other pillars to assist them in accomplishing their goals. Go ahead, please. So we divide the PAFI program is currently divided into 4 or 5 gates. The first 3 gates are what we called pre-screening or initial testing. That was an outcome of lessons learned from the initial PAFI SIR program, where fuels made it into the program and failed on the first durability test. So as a lesson learned, it was a requirement to get through gate 3 to pass that, what the bottom one there, the mini durability test. In addition, there's a minimum subset of materials compatibility, engine performance and fuel properties, comparison of the specification to 100 low lead D910, and then performance and detonation testing. And both the LyondellBasell VP Racing UL100E and the Phillips 66 Afton Chemical 100M were in that process for approximately 2.5 years, which was an R&D iterative process trying to get all of those boxes checked. As Lario mentioned, the Afton Phillips 100M did not complete the mini durability test successfully. The LyondellBasell VP Racing UL100E did pass that test on a TSO 550K in November of last year. At that point, we proceeded into full-scale testing, which heads toward gate 4, which is the completion of all that testing and provisions for performing the fleet authorization and the ASTM specification. In that, there's materials compatibility, of which about 20% is complete. Performance and detonation testing on 6 different engines models, that's about 5% complete. The durability portion of the testing is about 1/4 complete. There's been 150-hour endurance test followed by a 200-hour flight cycle test on the TSO 550K. And that will be done on, as mentioned, on 3 other engine models. Propeller vibration testing to evaluate stress levels, that's really just starting. And then the aircraft flight testing, which has not started yet. Go ahead. So those are laid out on this chart, those 5 elements. Detonation and performance shows the engines models that will be tested. We're currently testing a Continental TSO 520 VB. We will also retest a Lycoming TIO 540 J2B. Lycoming IO540 K185, Continental IO550D, Continental 0470U, and a Pratt & Whitney large radial DC-3 engine, an R1830 S1C3G. And we're about 30% done on the initial test in the full scale. On the durability and performance side, we've completed the testing on the Continental TSI 550K. That engine was set up to the Cirrus SR22T fuel flows and ratings, and was from all quick look assessment, a very successful test. We still have to tear down the engine and perform the measurements. We will additionally test the other engines shown here, the IO360C1F radial, the W670-6N, and an A1A. The aircraft testing protocol consists of a helicopter, a Robinson R-44-2, a turbocharged Cirrus SR-22T, Beechcraft Bonanza, a Cessna 206, twin, a Cessna 402C, the Piper Malibu PA-46-350, a Cessna 182Q, which is a carbureted engine, and a radio-powered aircraft, a T-6 Harvard 4. There's some additional testing that is required, propeller vibration, cold starting evaluation, and capacitive gauging testing that will all go into the final reports. And then the last category there is materials compatibility, and it's broken out into several categories. The little numbers there indicate how many different elements are tested. For example, on metallics, there are 32 different metals that are tested for compatibility, and the charts show where we're complete. We're a little over 20% complete overall. Some done on metals and non-metals. Most of the paint testing is complete. About a third of the polysulfides, all the O-rings, aircraft hoses, and then there's the others you see there, the distribution system, fuel bladders, composite resins, complete composites, some OEM identified materials they thought were critical. And then the 4 of the OEMs are performing their own dedicated simulated wing testing to evaluate performance and compatibility. Go ahead. So to that point, it's going to take about 50,000 gallons of fuel. The little drums you see there have been sent already to those locations to perform that materials compatibility OEM testing and a little bit of the propeller vibration testing. But that's where the fuel will be headed, we believe. Go ahead. And this is the overall process to get to the authorization. So each of those tests you see on the left side with some progress bars. The results of that testing is used a couple of places. So the blue lines indicate, the testing informing what is the eligible fleet for the fuel. The green lines are used to inform the ASTM specification process. So it's a 4-step process on the ASTM. There's a research report followed by a test specification, and then there's a final research report that follows with the production specification. So the results of all the testing go into that ASTM specification. Additionally, they go into the modification of the R&D pillar to look at potential modifications that may or may not be required to make those aircraft eligible to utilize the fuel. And those all come together and are determined with what the eligible fleet is, and that goes into the fleet authorization documents that are defined in that policy statement. Go ahead. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Our next pillar update will be on supply chain infrastructure and deployment. And with the progress being made on the deployment side, this is a very important next step. Ryan Manner, could you please take us through your update here?
Sure, thanks, Eric. Next slide. So this is the pillar foundation slide you've probably seen before. It's available on the website. At a high level, the objectives are to support, facilitate, and evaluate the various aspects of the transition to unleaded avgas. We're taking a systematic, data-driven, and collaborative approach, ultimately helping to ensure that it's a safe transition in terms of aircraft operations and fuel quality throughout the transition. Next slide. So I'm going to use the slides or the kind of as backdrop, the slide that Rob went through, and focus on the supply chain infrastructure and deployment. Again, within the context of the big picture. The scope is from production to aircraft level approval, and it's intended to help, as others have mentioned, to inform the regulatory and policy proposals, the FAA, EPA rulemaking, and a big one is stakeholder decisions on when to transition to unleaded fuel and to which fuel. And finally, support the other pillars. We're doing this through a stakeholder outreach. As an example, we have weekly team meetings with producers, distributors, FBOs, and aircraft operators and owners, and plan to add a team for the FAA licensed mechanics. So again, weekly team meetings with those teams to understand the challenges, opportunities, and help inform the content development needed for the education and awareness. We've also surveyed the distributors and had direct meetings with them to better understand their challenges, and plan to do the same for producers in the near future. We've started also outreach. Kurt mentioned this. I think it's been ongoing, but I'm doing more direct outreach to stakeholders in Alaska and Hawaii to better understand their unique challenges and needs. And then finally, we're developing, to help with this information, is the developing awareness and educational content, tools, and ultimately metrics to measure the progress towards the transition to unleaded avgas. Next slide. Just to highlight some of the key challenges, you're going to see these in later slides relative to each of the stakeholders, but big ones: maintaining 100 low lead during the transition. And then avgas is the only remaining fuel that uses lead, and there's only one lead producer today, so there's obviously pressure on them to continue to produce that. And then competing high octane fuels have not been tested for compatibility with one another. This may be done at some point in the future, but there's no guarantee of success. So that's a big challenge. And others have spoken. Kurt, I think you talked about this, but in terms of complexity, this outlines the key parts of the process, and there's many layers underneath this, and many stakeholders that need to be part of this, not part of it, make individual decisions in terms of when they transition into what fuel. And then finally, state and local government action that forces premature transition creates challenges, one of which is maintaining 100 low lead availability. I think we've seen this in California and some other areas. Next slide. So over these next few, I'm going to focus on each of the key stakeholder groups, show a few statistics and some of the challenges, and kind of show you the how it fits in the context of the broader infrastructure, supply infrastructure. These maps on the next few slides, also a little shout out to the website. These will be, Eric's going to talk a little bit more at the end, but these maps that you're going to see are part of an interactive map that's on the toolkit on the homepage of flyEAGLE.org. So some statistics, the demand for 100 low lead is about 180 million gallons a year, compared to car gas is about 135 billion. I think that's 750 times the demand for car gas versus avgas. So it's relatively small. There's currently 7 refineries producing 100 low lead. That's 4 companies, 7 locations, compared to about 125 refiners in the U.S. that produce car gas and other fuels. Also on this map, note the X up at the top there. That indicates a refinery in Minnesota that stopped producing 100 low lead last year, Again, that's one of the key challenges. We hope that kind of thing doesn't continue, but those are, again, independent decisions. And then also here, if you notice in Indiana, I've got noted the Swift Fuels is blending UL94. And then it's in Baton Rouge, Vitol has announced that, and previously discussed here, that they're now producing or making GAMI's G100UL, and it's available for sale. Some of the challenges here on the producer side, risk and liability, this has been talked about a lot as well. And that is, anytime you bring a new fuel on, there's additional risk and liability just due to the newness of it. And with aviation fuels, it's even more important. Limited available infrastructure. So only a small number of refineries of those 125 have the right processing equipment to produce the high octane base fuel needed for avgas. So while there's a lot of opportunities there in terms of refineries in the U.S., it's my understanding few have the processing equipment to make the high octane base fuel. And then the demand is small and uncertain. As we talked about the demand compared to car gas. So it's a bit of a challenge to get up and running with the already small demand. And then with avgas still in place, the startup quantities are pretty small, which makes it difficult. Next slide. And you'll see the theme here. The risk is kind of throughout this supply chain. So some statistics here. The blue dots are the terminals. The red dots are the refineries. There's about 15 distributors and about 35 distribution terminals in the U.S. Product moves by truck, rail, and water. I've got, there may not be terminals per se in Alaska and Hawaii, but starting to better understand how avgas gets supplied there, and it's through ISO containers, and they've got definitely unique challenges that we need to better understand. Let's see. Again, for context here, there's about 1,300 terminals in the U.S. that distribute car gas and other fuels. Talked about the risk, indemnification, and insurance coverage, compatibilities of the fuels, the competing fuels, and the materials in the distribution system, ensuring that there's not any issues with the wetted components, again, in the existing distribution system with any of the new fuels. Supply availability and security, again, there are small quantities, long distances to cover. As Rob mentioned, these new fuels will likely use a similar infrastructure that's out there today, but it doesn't have to be that. As an example, on the refinery side, there may be more blending going on than just full refining of the end product at a given refinery. So that's going to probably be unique in this transition. And we talked about the state and local mandates that force premature transition, obviously creates challenges. Next slide. So FBOs, there's about 1,500 or 3,500 FBOs selling avgas today, 100 low lead. Challenges, low demand, supply availability, infrastructure constraints. Only a small percentage have a second tank for another fuel. And then on the risk side, misfueling risk, having multiple grades of avgas. Today, there's just one. So when you introduce additional grades, that creates additional risk. And then again, insurance coverage as well. Next slide. Owners and pilots. 600,000, there may be less than 600,000 that actually fly and operate piston engine aircraft, but whether 600,000 or 300,000, it's a big number that needs to make a decision in this transition. Again, unleaded fuel availability. Right now, there's, I think, 180 locations in the U.S. that sell MoGas or car gas, and 35 that sell UL94. When you compare that to the 3,500, it's fairly small. And then Another challenge is the manufacturer warranty coverage and tech support for a new fuel. Those will all be things that that'll have to be considered as people kind of decide when to transition into what fuel. Next slide. So in the beginning, as I thought about this and the title of the pillar, supply chain infrastructure, really thought about it from the production to the wing of the aircraft. And over the last several months, I've been to kind of expanded that to include the aircraft level approval process, which is over on the right there. That's going to be a key part of this because you can have a fuel approved and it can be authorized to use in an aircraft, but until each owner operator takes action to effectively get legal to use that fuel, you're not done yet. So I've expanded this a little bit. There's over 220,000 piston engine aircraft in the fleet, 250,000 FAA certified mechanics or licensed mechanics that are all going to play a key role in this. The chart on the lower left is the fleet breakdown between certificated and non-certificated. You heard, I think others, Paul or Rob earlier on to say that the STC applies to all certificated aircraft depending on the fuel. Non-certificated aircraft, which would be the experimental light sport aircraft, have to use a different process. It doesn't mean they can't use the fuel. It just means that the STC doesn't apply because they're not certificated. So that's the point of that distinction. Next slide. Fuel quality and safety is paramount. Again, Rob mentioned this, but ensuring the fuel is clean, dry, and on specification throughout the supply chain and into the wing, and then maintain safe aircraft operations and mitigate misfueling risk are obviously very key to a successful transition. Next slide. So this one, it's the last slide, and market acceptance, and Kurt spoke to this, but you can have a fuel. It can be authorized for a number of aircraft in the fleet. But this is, I think, kind of the softer side where each of these stakeholders highlighted, the pilots, FBOs, distributors, and producers, have to make independent business decisions about when to transition into what fuel. And the factors that have been talked about in previous slides and highlighted here are going to be the kind of the backdrop of how they make those decisions. And I won't go over those again, but there's a lot in this, and a lot of players and stakeholders that have to make those decisions. To kind of wrap it up, the focus area that I'm working on is to help inform that decision with information so that they can make a decision with the best information available. And that's it. So Eric, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Our next pillar update will be on research, development, and innovation, which is foundational to the work at Eagle. Jennifer Miller, could you please take us through your pillar update?
Sure. Good afternoon. The R&D pillar exists to mitigate impacts on the fleet by applying existing or novel, technical solutions. At this point, primarily, we expect those challenges to be octane margin and material compatibility. The cornerstones of our activity are based upon stakeholder participation and a thorough, methodical evaluation of the candidate fuels against the existing fleet's constraints. Safety is our #1 priority, and we want to efficiently leverage existing technologies and certification pathways. Our deliverables further include the installation designs, ICAs, and dumping those regulatory hurdles to implementation. And we will work very closely with the other 3 pillars to achieve our goals. Next. You heard Ryan speak about the fleet registry. The FAA fleet registry is a tool foundational to the R&D objectives. A deep dive into the registry gives us over 222,000 entries, of which only about 80% are certificated. The rest are made up of experimental, special permit, or other oddball categories. We have 146 engine manufacturers, over 3,800 airframe manufacturers, 1,785 certificated engine models, over 7,000 aircraft models. And it's probably intuitive that the top 3 engine manufacturers are Lycoming, Continental, and Rotax, but there are 143 engine manufacturers accounting for less than 9% of that fleet. And this slide exists to illustrate the complexity of the task before us. And we're going to use this catalog to rack and stack the demographics of the fleet so that we can prioritize the work ahead of us. Categories such as geographic location of the fleet, vintage, and by vintage, I'm not talking about warbirds, I'm referring to materials or primitive instrumentation, and application, which parts of the fleet serve remote populations, which perform military, safety, or security functions, of which we might want to prioritize the development and certification of our technical solutions. Next slide. We can also characterize the fleet from what we know about engines. And if you imagine this graphic of a rotary engine as a pie chart of the fleet, we already know roughly 2/3 of the fleet will be transparent in this transition and that they should not be impacted by a transition to the candidate fuels. But another tool in our belt is a complex model that classifies octane demand of an engine with more granularity based on what we know about engines. And this is a powerful tool which, along with additional planned testing, will help us whittle away further at which portion of the fleet will not require accommodation to address any gaps presented by any of the candidate fuels octane. And once we identify those engines, what remains is those aircraft which our R&D activities need to address. We expect portions of the fleet may be impacted by material incompatibility with candidate fuels, density which varies from 100 low lead, or other issues which have yet to be identified. Next slide. So in 2024, we will flesh out a candidate fuels matrix between what we know from the specifications, what the STC holders will share, and what the Tech Center has yet to discover. We'll butt this fuels matrix against the well-conditioned fleet demographic picture so we can positively identify portions of the fleet that will be impacted by the candidate fuels, prioritize implementation of the technologies given the potential sheer volume of design, testing, and certification efforts, and then roll out those technologies. Technologies we're considering include, but aren't limited to, electronic ignition and ignition timing changes. We know timing can be changed to provide detonation margin, but then there's a power trade-off. Engine monitoring or other instrumentation which can be used to closely observe engine behavior and respond in real time with revised operating procedures, and other technologies that aren't foreign to the industry. And as I mentioned, the pillars are collaborating closely with each other, and this is a good segue into my next topic, as Lycoming has worked closely with the FAA regarding another recent challenge we've experienced in our transition to an unleaded fuel solution, and that's valve seat recession at UND. Next slide. In June 2023, the University of North Dakota at Grand Forks switched to UL94 supplied by Swift, and that UL94 conformed to ASTM B7547. And this is for those of you in the audience who aren't already familiar with this topic. I know a lot of you are. And by August 2023, the first case of valve seat recession had presented itself by low compression. They have in their fleet 14 Seminoles, 76 Archers, and 5 R-44s. All of those aircraft have parallel head, standard 8.5-to-1 compression engines that have plenty of detonation margin on UL94. All told, at the end of the day, DSR was experienced in roughly 28% of the engines in the fleet. DSR was only found in those engines after 400 hours minimum on the engines in which it was seen. We did monitor the fleet via dry tappet clearance, which is not how you measure DSR, but it was a way for us to monitor the fleet non-invasively. in addition to compression checks. In October, UND switched back to 100 low lead. Next slide. A little primer on valve seat recession for those in the audience who are not engine people. On the left is a cutaway of a cylinder head with an intake valve on the left and an exhaust valve on the right. In this illustration, both valves are closed and resting seated in the valve seats. In this illustration, the valve seats are bronze. In the upper right, you can see an open exhaust valve. VSR occurs when the hammering of the valve on the seat during operation results in material displacement and deformation on the seat, resulting in a condition where the valve and seat interfaces fail to seal. We were really put back on our heels with this, given the decades of Peterson STCs and years of fielded UL91 and UL94 experience. Hundreds of thousands of flight hours. We have no reason to believe this is a safety of flight issue for other operators. Lycoming does not have a history of valve seat recession. When this was first reported, Lycoming quickly composed a list of primary and secondary hypotheses, also knowing full well that the circumstance could simply be the perfect storm of small contributions. While clearly the principal cause is that in the absence of lead, there is nothing in the fuel to provide a cushion between the seat and the valve, there are other aggravating factors at play here. Yet our investigation has revealed no smoking guns. The engines and cylinders are conforming, the valve seats and timing are conforming, the fuel was conforming to the spec and not contaminated. I know there has been a tremendous amount of speculation in the press regarding UND's operation, and I can confirm that leaning procedures were followed in accordance with the respective pilots' operating handbooks for Archers and Seminoles, that is full rich for takeoff, climb, and descent, while leaning for best economy during cruise. You can go to the next slide. Currently, our leading hypothesis is related to aromatic content in the fuel and the thermal impact on the valve seat. Lycoming and the FAA are pursuing aromatic sensitivity testing to validate or invalidate that theory. And I want to stress that this is just a hypothesis and that not all parties are in agreement. What we do know is that this is isolated to UND. We do not believe this is a safety of flight issue because it is discoverable. The FAA, UND, Lycoming, and Swift are working closely together with other members of the industry to isolate the cause. And we also continue to stay in close contact with other users of UL94 at non-UND locations while we perform our testing. And the bottom line is that any learning now early in our transition process, whether we feel otherwise or not, is a gift. Because the sooner we know, the sooner we can respond, and that will inform our path forward in the transition to an unleaded future. And that's all I've got for today.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Our fourth pillar update will cover regulation, policy, and programmatic activities. Last October, the EPA issued an endangerment finding which advanced the process for rulemaking and other regulatory steps by the FAA. And now, Ralph Ivanelli, would you please update us on where we are in the regulatory process?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Hi, everybody. Ralph Ivanelli here from the FAA. So it's true that when the EPA did their positive endangerment finding for lead emissions from piston-powered aircraft engines, it bestowed on the FAA a new set of authorities. It came down through statute 44714, which is the orange circle with number 4 next to it. This new statutory authority allows the FAA to regulate fuel components, in this case lead, as well as fuel additives. And so FAA is embarking on how to map out that rulemaking, in parallel, the EPA is also considering their rulemaking for lead emissions from piston-powered aircraft. That's in circle number 2. And so you can see that the positive endangerment finding kicked off 2 regulatory actions that need to happen. We are currently working on rulemaking right now and discussing it with EPA as far as the way we would regulate. And it could be in joint rules, it could be in sequential rules, it could be in a different fashion. So we are taking it seriously, and we're trying to get the rulemaking going as soon as possible. Obviously, what you've heard over the last 20 or an hour and 20 minutes or so has been a lot of the details that lead to an informed rulemaking scenario. And this is what we're after here. Technologies and costs are very important when it comes to evaluating rules. And so we will be doing that along with EPA. And we plan on kicking off rulemaking this year. Our rulemaking process will be very normal. It will comprise of a notice of proposed rulemaking, a draft rule, open for comment, and then, of course, the final rule after that, after we address comments. So it's a very normal process. And then, of course, there might be some additional rulemaking as far as engine emission certification on the FAA side. We're still holding that out there as a possibility. So that completes the 4 rulemakings that you're seeing on the screen here and how they're coupled together. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Will Reinhardt, who will talk about some airports. Please, Ron, Will.
Thank you, Ralph. Hi, everybody. Will Reinhardt here with the FAA Office of Airports. So really just wanted to briefly revisit the fact that we continue to emphasize the constructive actions that airports, service providers, and airport users can take to support the transition to an unleaded future. And pretty much every forum, we always kind of like re-emphasize these items. And those are kind of working to offer unleaded fuel types while maintaining 100 low lead, increasing distance between run-up locations and people on and off airport, minimizing engine idle time and run-up time, promoting airport and pilot awareness. In addition to that, we also really put an asterisk next to the importance of planning for a transition. So airports that are conducting a master plan, scoping a master plan, or even thinking about a master plan, we're really encouraging folks to plan for a kind of a predictable and orderly and safe transition. So plan for that, include it in your process, and I think we'll all be better off. And then on the topic of the things we emphasize, I just want to emphasize there are many examples across the U.S. Where airports are exemplifying these constructive actions. And the things that we're seeing range from procuring new tanks to store and dispense unleaded, leveraging existing spare tanks, purchasing fuel trucks to bridge a gap in infrastructure, municipalities, cities, counties, states, or not so much states, but basically governmental organizations working to find creative paths to fund purchase of STCs at a given airport. And of course, planning for a safe and orderly transition. We have examples of airports doing that and really working hard to find a path forward. And that's pretty much all I got. Pass it back to Maria.
Actually, it's Eric. Thank you,
Eric, sorry.
Ralph. No problem. Thank you, Ralph and Will. Our final update for today is to address our updated website, flyEAGLE.org. We've made enhancements to the website so that it's easier for you to find the latest information and news from Eagle, as well as other important information regarding the path forward to our safe and smart unleaded transition. The website now includes stakeholder resources and an interactive toolkit. We invite you to visit the updated website and use it as a valuable resource going forward. And as always, we invite your feedback. Just some of the things that you'll see within the interactive toolkit, airport and logistics maps, guidance on transitioning a flight school to unleaded gas, and also a big picture slide that provides an overview of all the players involved in the full transition. You'll be able to see some media coverage that is focused on our transition. You'll be able to connect with us on X, also known to some still as Twitter. And you'll have the ability to join the Eagle mailing list, stakeholder list, and register for future stakeholder meetings. Again, we invite your feedback. Please let us know what you think of the website and your thoughts. At this time, we are happy to answer your questions. As a reminder, we ask that if you still have one, you can submit it through the chat. I'm going to call on Andre Castro to see if we have any questions for our presenters.
Thanks, Eric. Yes, kind of our first question actually came in last week, and it has to deal with UND foul seat recession. The question is, will the issue slow the progress toward a universal unleaded fuel, as well as, what does Eagle recommend for the next action regarding the VSR issue?
If anybody has an answer for that, we'd love for you to unmute yourself, any of our presenters or panelists today.
Maria DePaus-Quintonio with the FAA. I can take that, and certainly will invite others to augment. So thank you for the question. So, and you heard a good overview briefing from Jennifer Miller from Lycoming today. So thank you, Jennifer, for your remarks. So the information from the UND Swift Lycoming efforts with UL 94 and the resulting data will help inform the safe and smart transition to unleaded fuel. And as you heard, as information is made available, it will be evaluated and incorporated as necessary into the work underway. And so just to sort of recap and highlight the need for strong continuing commitment to the transition and the importance of continued monitoring and evaluation of the fuels as they enter the field. And certainly operational experience is gained. So as we noted and we heard from our opening remarks, Eagle stakeholders are committed to ensuring the safe and smart transition to unleaded fuel by 2030 or sooner, and the continued commitment to monitor the fleet's progress well past the fuel's initial implementation. So as part of Eagle's recommendation for next steps, again, as you heard, we're going to continue to monitor. Lycoming is working with partners at UND Swift and to understand the issue and to get further information. And again, as we learn more, we'll certainly continue that to share that information with all of our stakeholders as we're going through that process.
If I could just add something. My name is Chris DaCosta. I'm the CEO at Swift Fuels.
Hear you, Chris.
And besides UL 94, our 100 octane fuel called 100R has been completed 400 hours of endurance and flight duty cycle testing. And that fuel has an 80 valve seat recession additive, which would tend to want the industry, I think, to accelerate towards the new fuel. And it's our company's intent that UL 94 will cease and be replaced by 100R in the months ahead.
Thank you, Chris.
Our next question came during Tim's part of the presentation. The question was, what is the test condition parameters that were in kind of that Gate 4 PAFI presentation that you gave, Tim?
Yeah, I think we've discussed that at prior meetings, but in general, the detonation and performance involves comparing the horsepower generated between 100 low lead and the test fuel. Detonation is tested through the envelope of engine operation, which includes altitude conditions and hot day conditions. The aircraft test protocol consists of handling, starting, leaning, then it's followed by a cooling climb, a cooling test, as well as a hot fuel test. Propeller vibration is a comparison of the vibratory signature obtained from the blades and the hub of the prop, compared between 100 low lead and the test fuel. The durability testing is a 150-hour 3349 endurance cycle which is run at high temps for a large part of that and a lot of high power, followed by a 200-hour flight cycle simulation that does, start, taxi, take off, climb, cruise and it alternates between best power and best economy cruises. The materials testing is mainly laboratory testing, with the exception of the OEM wing tests, which are in progress now, which actually do more of a fit for purpose test on either a wing or a simulated wing or an aged bladder, for example. But yeah, the entire engine operating envelope is mapped out at those corners of that envelope to make sure that the fuel is compliant. And as far as valve seat recession, that is a part of the durability test, always has been. The test we just completed did not show any signs of advanced valve seat recession on a Continental engine.
We had a couple of additional questions kind of regarding PATHY. Another one is, can you please confirm that the PATHY process is to identify a true drop-in fuel?
Yeah, the chart I went over that had the blue lines and the green lines show that process, that any deficiencies of the fuel in either detonation, durability, or materials compatibility, or flight testing for that matter, feed into that modification R&D pillar B, as we call it, the R&D pillar activity, so that all those accommodations would be included in the fleet authorization so that the fuel would be applicable, usable by the entire fleet.
Another question that was posed on PATHY was, what paperwork will be needed to add it to the aircraft pilot operating handbook for a PATHY fuel candidate?
Yeah, we did cover that in prior meetings, but it basically involves, per the policy statement, there are 2 documents that will be produced for each fuel. An eligible fleet authorization summary report, which is the technical data supporting all of that with the instructions for how to implement the change. It will involve a placard. It will involve an addendum to the POH or equivalent that shows the fuel is eligible, and it will require logbook entries.
Kind of our last set on the PATHY. If the PATHY process, fails to identify a suitable fuel, what's the next step?
We went through this with the original PAFI program. We had 2 fuels get in. There was a lot of pressure to get that going. It started, and we ran into problems. So those lessons learned were rolled into that gate 1, 2, and 3 process to ensure that there was a high likelihood of success for any fuels that made it into the full-scale testing. And currently the Landell, Basel, VP Racing, UL 100E met all of those requirements. So we have a high confidence level that it will complete the rest of the testing adequately. There may be some accommodations that will have to be made for a small percentage of the fleet that will be incorporated in this process as well.
Thank you, Tim. Our next question kind of came, Ryan, during your presentation. The question is there a special consideration for stakeholders in U.S. territories, including Puerto Rico?
Yeah, we haven't made much outreach in that area. It is part of the map, so it's on the radar now. And so I think just by virtue of this question, I think that's a go-do to reach out and along with Alaska and Hawaii to outreach the U.S. territories to understand their challenges. So I'll take that as a action.
All right. Next question, kind of a little bit larger. Is 100 octane the minimum level that will be approved?
The 3 current fuels that are out there are all 100 octane fuels. Okay. The GAMI, the Swift, and the LyondellBasell, VP Racing are all 100 octane unleaded fuels.
Right. We have our next question. For a fuel where 100E and 100M fuels are in the milestones and development and timelines, do these two potential high octane unleaded fuels currently meet the minimum octane margins?
There are some points on certain engines where 100 octane does not appear to be enough detonation margin. And that is the focus again of the R&D pillar, to identify accommodations to make those fuels usable in those engines and aircraft.
Next question. Has the EPA performed preliminary assessments on all fuels to ensure that the endangerment to the environment, since this is the main driver for eliminating lead?
Again, if any of our participants, panelists are on mute, please unmute. So we can
Hi, this is Ralph. I'll address that question. So EPA doesn't have authority over aviation fuels, so they wouldn't be doing any assessments of that. Their sole mechanism is the endangerment finding, which they already executed, as we talked about. So they wouldn't be involved in any preliminary assessments at all of the fuels. But that's just where we are right now.
All right, I'll move on to we got two more questions here. The plaintiff in the legal settlement in California has demanded that the FBO supply unleaded fuel when it is commercially available. What does the Eagle program expect a judicial decision in California requiring the supply of GAMI G100UL now that it is available for sale?
I'll take a crack at that one. I would say that this is really a legal issue between the distributors, each of the distributors, and the California Environmental Health Attorney through their attorney. So I don't think it would be appropriate for Eagle to comment on those legal considerations that the distributors would make, other than to say that the definition of commercially available has really extended beyond the issue of just volume of fuel, but also risk mitigation, pricing, and other issues that implicate that or impact that. And so I think those conversations are ongoing between the legal teams on whether or not CEH pursues that further. There's risk to that. But I think our focus needs to continue on the process for testing for the new fuel and the distribution of it.
Yeah, and as the second co-chair, thank you, Kurt. I would agree with what he's commented on here. So,
final question here. Regarding PAFI, what sort of accommodations or limitations would you see as one of these fuels, altitude, RPM, or other operating constraints?
There's a wide range of possibilities that will vary by engine and aircraft. Jen covered a lot of them in the R&D pillar briefing, but yeah, I mean, it could be different limits above a certain outside air temp. It could be a timing change, ignition timing change. It could be CHT limit changes, could be critical altitude. Don't think there's any RPM ones we know of. But there's a wide range, and some of them will be milder than others, obviously, the further the gap is. So, again, we're, as part of the testing protocol on the detonation test, we are running sensitivity for ignition timing, outside air temp, manifold air temp, cylinder head temp. So we will have a lot of that data to inform Pillar B of where we need to apply resources to make the proper accommodations.
Thank you, Tim. There was one final comment. I'll just kind of read it. The answer was also given in the chat. Is if the GAMI 100UL is available for sale, The reply was, yes, it's available for sale. Please email avgas@vitol.com. With that, that kind of concludes the questions that we received, Eric. Actually, I think there was one follow-up question. Should Eagle reach out to the EPA to do these assessments? Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me, yeah, I think that was it.
I would add, and I'll let Lirio comment too, that I'm sure that Lirio's team and the FAA testing team is in coordination and communication with the EPA. And so there are discussions addressing those. I'm not sure specific to the question about that was relative to the other materials and other fuels. But I think there is discussions relative to the timing of the EPA in the rulemaking that the FAA has to do. Lirio?
Yeah, I was wondering if our rulemaking pillar was going to step in, but we've been actively engaged with our counterpart agency and working with them to coordinate our action. So that's ongoing. I think that'll address the question as you indicated. So we have the conversations and the timing is being adjusted so that we can take the appropriate action together.
There was one final question, and this will kind of wrap up our Q&A. If more than one fuel is certified, what's the plan to ensure that all fuels in the market are compatible with each other?
I'm on screen, so I guess I'll say this has been a large discussion we've had when we've had our industry discussion meetings. So as we start to get approved fuels, that will be something we'll consider. It has to be an aspect for it to be commercially available. I think that's what we have to consider because we want to make sure we have the safe operation, which also goes into the distribution, the storage, the handling, etc. So right now the first step is that we need to be able to ensure that we have an approved fuel, that they're available there, and once they're out and they're being distributed, we will ensure that they have that fungibility. That's something that is going to be looked at, and industry will be addressing that. Because the intent is to be safe, and that has to be considered.
Lirio, I would just add, as you noted, we've had extensive conversations about that topic, and I think ultimately the industry, airports, and FBOs that sell fuel will need to consider those elements when they're deciding how to implement their programs, either bridge programs today or conversions to fuel in the future, to eliminate the potential for misfueling and those risks that happen. That's just another example of the concern relative to the fungibility and the commercially available language that FBOs and airports are now considering in the distribution network.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Lirio and Kurt. This concludes the Q&A portion, and thank you everybody for your questions. It shows that this is an issue. This is a transition that has a lot of facets, a lot of factors to it. As we begin to wrap up, I'd like to call on Lirio and Kurt for a chance for a closing remark here.
I'll start out, Lirio. As you can see from the presentations today, there's a very complicated process to go from, I'll say, refiner to the actual wing of the airplane to the user. And there's quite a bit of effort going on. I think industry really wants to encourage that this information shared today gets onto our website and it's out there to continue to educate not only the users, but other stakeholders, elected leaders that are considering measures relative to this topic. And so I think we continue the efforts that we're making as a team between FAA and industry to work as fast as we can, as safe as we can.
Yeah, I'll just close out as well to say, first off, appreciate all those that are participating here. I think that shows the interest in us trying to work together in this. Eagle is intended to really bring industry together, and from the approval all the way through operations. So we're really trying to look at it as the full spectrum. A lot of questions, a lot of activities, and the engagement that we've had with industry has helped us to inform us as we've worked through this process. So again, the partnership for me has been really valued, and I think we want to continue that. And as Kurt indicated, there are still a lot of aspects of the work that we have to do, but we are cognizant of that, and we're really working together. So appreciate everyone who took the time to participate in this seminar. So look forward to the next opportunity as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lario. And that concludes today's briefing. On behalf of the Eagle Initiative, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time, your insight, and your interest. As stated through the last hour and change, there is progress, and there's also work to be done on the safe and smart unleaded fuel transition. We will continue to provide you updates along the way. For those of you that are going to EAA Air Venture in Oshkosh, we are planning a session, a public forum on that Monday, July 22nd, like we did last year. And we hope to see you there. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.